Are we going to stand while we do this?
Are we ready? Hello. I'm here to introduce Rudy here for our next president. That's it. And, the reason I really like Rudy's a Yankee fan, too. He's my very good, close friend, and we're looking for an Italian president, too. That's it. Rudy, take over.
Thank you, Yogi. Thank you. Thank you very, very much, Yogi Berra. I should announce that we're interrupting for a half hour the Yankee game. The Yankees are winning 2-1, and Yogi and I were just watching it. I want to thank the Manquettes for having us in their home, which is one of 1,000 homes that are right now all hooked together, listening to us, and in 50 states, all 50 states, and in England. So we're national, international, all over the country, over 1,000 homes. This has really been enormously successful, and if it works as well as we think it is, we'll keep repeating this because it's a great way to reach a tremendous number of people. Now, I'm running for President of the United States. You know that. Okay. That's why you're here. Okay. And I'm running for President of the United States because I believe the country needs very strong, very determined leadership, very optimistic leadership, and we have very big problems that we're facing. And I listed 12 commitments, made them in June, as the 12 things that I believe are the most important things to get done for the next president. The idea is to try to have us oriented on growth and on principles that are quintessential American principles to solve our problems. So I'm going to summarize those principles into two because I think they're the two most important. I believe the next president of the United States has to make sure that this country remains on offense against Islamic terrorism. If we don't, we're going to see ourselves with a much longer war against us, and we're going to see ourselves having to deal with far greater problems. The lesson that you take from the 20th century is, I think, pretty simple. The lesson that you take from the 20th century is, in order to deal with people who are tyrants, in order to deal with people who are terrorists, in order to deal with people who are dictators, you have to be strong. And the more defensive you are, the more they take advantage of you. The more militarily strong you are and the more determined you are, the sooner and the faster you deal with those difficulties. We made that mistake with Hitler, of not dealing with him soon enough. We made the mistake with communism. And then in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, we made that mistake with Islamic terrorism. I intend to learn from that mistake, and we're going to be on offense against Islamic terrorism, and that is the number one commitment that I make to the American people. And the second group of commitments involve the direction of our country. I believe that in November of 2005, the American people are going to make a choice. Just like they're going to make a choice on terrorism, they're going to make a choice about the direction of our country and our society. The choice they make on terrorism is going to be offense or defense between me and the Democrats. The choice they make on the rest of our society is going to be whether we go in the direction of much bigger government and government control of our economy, or we go in the direction of a lot more private initiative, private enterprise, private decision-making. Almost all of the other commitments that I make are about giving people more power. The way I see it, the Democrats want to give government more power. What I want to do is give people more power. That's why I favor reducing taxes. I favor reducing taxes because I think you'll do more intelligent, creative things with your money than government does. It's a choice between, money. Where do you put it? Do you put it in government? Do you give it back to people? And I think if we give the money back to you, more people go to work, more businesses grow, America gets a greater share of the global economy. Democrats believe that if you raise taxes, they're going to solve problems. I have just the opposite view. The same thing is true about the size of government. I believe we have to reduce the size of government. The federal government in particular is too big. We let it grow out of control. And we need a president who knows how to reduce the size of government. I did that in New York. And believe me, if you can do it in New York, right, Yogi? You can do it anywhere, right? If you can hit in New York, you can hit anywhere, right? And I say that facetiously, but it's really true. The impediments to reducing the size of government in New York City and the impediments to reducing taxes in New York City were tremendous. Nobody had ever done it before. When I became the mayor of New York City, I was virtually the first mayor to reduce taxes. I was the first mayor to really restrain the growth of government. And we were very successful in doing that, and I got great results. So I believe in these things not just as a theory. Some other candidates believe in these things as a theory. But I believe in it both as a theory and because it worked for me, because I had actual results by doing that. And I also think that we have to give people more choice over their health care. The only way in which we're going to solve the health care problems we have in this country is not by going in the direction of more government, not by going in the direction of socialized medicine, which is what Hillary wants to do, or Barack Obama or John Edwards. They all want to go in the direction of the government controlling health care. When I looked at their proposals, I counted about 8 new government agencies that they would establish. The last thing in the world we need are 8 new government agencies to do anything, whether it's health care or anything else. What we should be doing is trying to figure out how to give you more control over your own health care by giving you a tax deduction, by giving you a tax exemption, by giving you a health savings account. You go out and buy your own health insurance. We're going to do a lot better if Americans buy their own health insurance than if the government puts people on coverage or if we have employers buying health insurance. So if I can encourage you to buy your own health insurance, I just drove down the price of health insurance. And you've driven it down if you buy it yourself. You'd get a $15,000 deduction for anyone who bought their own health insurance. And if you bought it for less than $15,000, you'd get to keep the difference. So let's say you found a policy for $12,000. You would get to keep $3,000 in tax-free money as part of your health savings account. And that would be a real inducement for people to do that. And ask yourself this question. What is the, if you have to reduce the price of something and you have to increase the quality of it, what's the only thing that works to reduce price and increase quality? Does government mandate work to do that? No. If you have a government mandate, price goes up. Minute someone selling something knows that people are commanded to buy it, the price goes up. The only thing that reduces price and increases quality is a big market, a lot of consumers. Just think about how people end up affording. You're all watching me on a computer, right? Well, when computers first came out, for many people they were unaffordable. How did they become so cheap so that people can buy them? Lots of people bought them. They didn't become so cheap because government mandated that you had to have a computer. They didn't become so inexpensive because government subsidized buying it. They became inexpensive because a lot of people bought them. And that's the principle that has to work with health care. We've got to get a lot of people buying their own health care. And if they do, we're going to end up having a market in which it's reduced dramatically. So these are some of the principles that we're about. Energy independence, making certain that we give people choice over education as a way of saving education, making certain that we have judges who are strict constructionist judges, judges who interpret the Constitution the way it's written rather than try to make it up. All of these things are enormously important, and it's a totally different direction than the direction that the Democrats want to go in. And that's why we need your support. This is going to be a very, very interesting election. It's going to be a defining election, and we need a Republican candidate that can run in all 50 states. We're talking to all 50 states, and the difference between me and the other Republicans is I can run in all 50 states. If some of the others are nominated, there will be no campaign in the state of New Jersey. We're in New Jersey right now. Nobody will be here in New Jersey campaigning. The Democrats will take it for granted, and the Republicans will realize they can't win it. So I think we need a candidate this time who is a 50-state candidate, somebody who can run in all 50 states and have a chance to win in all 50 states. And that's the best way to have a Republican president. So I'm going to... So I think since we got 1,000 or more sites out there, And we've got lots of people in situations just like this. Maybe what we should do is take some questions. So we spend the maximum amount of time taking your questions and answering them and finding out what you're interested in. If you tell us who you are and where you're from, we can try to get some of those questions.
Well, Mayor, I think the very first thing that we have a special guest on the line to ask the first question via conference call. Dennis, are you there?
Yes.
We've got Dennis Miller.
Dennis, how are you?
Nice to call you. Hey, listen, I just wanted to say, as I watched Columbia President Bollinger the other day introduce the Iranian president, I was reminded how conflicted and neurotic the liberals in this country are about even approaching terrorism. I think at this point the Democratic plan to bring down Ahmadinejad is to let Bob Schramm run his re-election campaign. I was wondering, what would be your first tactic in dealing with Ahmadinejad, the mouse that hopes to roar?
Well, first thing I would do is not invite him to the inauguration. Now, that's being a little taking somewhat some liberties with what Barack Obama said, but Barack Obama said he would invite him without preconditions to the White House for conversations in the first year he was in office. After listening to him converse, I don't think that would be a particularly good idea. I believe that the way to deal with terrorists and people who support terrorism, the way he does and Iran does, is to ostracize them, not to embrace them. I think when you embrace them, not only do you make them more important, but there's something else that happened at Columbia that really disturbs me, and not enough time has been spent thinking about this. I believe that what the president of Columbia did and Columbia University did was a terrible mistake because it feeds Ahmadinejad's irrationality. It feeds his fantasy world. And Islamic terrorists live in a fantasy world. They have to live in a fantasy world to think that they're going to dominate the world, to think that they're going to conquer us, to think that they're going to reestablish a caliphate and everyone is going to either subscribe to their extreme version of their religion or we're going to pay tribute to them. This is what they believe. And they really believe that. Now that's unrealistic. That's being separated from the real world. They live in a somewhat of an area of fantasy. And when you evaluate your enemies, you better be clear as to whether they're rational or not. And he's not. And their country isn't, and it hasn't been for a very long time. At least the ruling group isn't. There might be a lot of people in the country that are rational, but the ruling group is not. So, first of all, it's got to be clear that we're not going to allow them to have nuclear weapons. It should be a clear, unequivocal, stated purpose of American policy that Iran is not going to become nuclear because they're too dangerous. They're too irresponsible. They're too unpredictable. And they live in a fantasy world, which was increased by Ahmadinejad being applauded at Columbia University. Just think of what he goes back to Iran with. He got up in front of an audience of Americans, castigated the United States of America, and had roughly half the audience on his side. He goes back thinking he's got a pretty good message. He goes back and thinks that he's got a pretty acceptable message about denying the Holocaust, being committed to the destruction of the State of Israel, believing that the United States is a malicious power that is acting as an imperialist in Iraq, believing that their ideas are better and more dominant than ours, including their extreme perversion of religion. He goes back with a certain amount of reinforcement that those ideas have currency in the United States. And that is very damaging to the whole effort of being able to have regime change in Iran, to have the people of Iran get a sense of how unacceptable he really is. So I think we have to make it clear that we're not going to allow them to be a nuclear power. That means the military option is definitely on the table. We cannot appear hesitant about that. An America that appears hesitant about how it's going to deal with Iran or Islamic terrorism in general is an America that is in much greater danger. I just ask people to remember, if they need some insight into the thinking of people who don't think like them. Just remember when the Iranians took hostages back in the late 1970s. They held American hostages for 444 days. They beat them, humiliated them, and tortured them. They released the hostages in 1 hour. The 1 hour in which they released the hostages was the 1 hour in which Ronald Reagan was sworn in as the President of the United States. And they saw something different in Ronald Reagan's eyes than they saw in the eyes of Jimmy Carter. What they saw in Ronald Reagan's eyes was a sense of purpose and determination and seriousness. What they saw in Jimmy Carter's eyes was indecision, vacillation, unclear about purpose, somebody they could assume that maybe we can take advantage of. And last thing in the world we need to do now is to show the Iranians and the Islamic world indecision, hesitation, defensiveness, lack of purpose. Just the opposite is the thing that's going to keep us safe. And just the opposite is going to give us a chance to maybe, just maybe, stop them from becoming nuclear and see a regime change there. But if they think we are too afraid to take military action ever or under any circumstances, we have no chance of stopping them any other way, unfortunately.
All right, thank you, Mayor. I hope to see you tomorrow morning.
You will.
All right, my friend.
Thanks, Dennis. Thank you very much for all your support. I really appreciate it. Again, I want to thank Yogi for coming out and supporting me, and I want to thank the Manquettes for letting us be at this wonderful home in New Jersey. And, you know, unfortunately, I can't see all of you, but I want to thank all of you for your support.
All right. I know Yogi feels it's not over until it's over, but as far as this next presidential election goes, it's over. You're it.
All right, well, this next question came from the web. It is from Jonathan in Florida. Mayor Giuliani, if elected, what type of judges would you nominate to the Supreme Court and other lower federal courts? In particular, would you nominate the Supreme Court judges in the mold of Justices Scalia and Thomas?
Well, the justices I would appoint would be very similar to the two that you mentioned, or Sam Alito, who's here from New Jersey, was a U.S. attorney here in New Jersey, while for a period of time when I was the U.S. attorney in New York across the river, or John Roberts, who I work with in the Justice Department. They would be good models of the kind of judge I would look for, the kind of judge I would try to appoint at all levels, from the district court, circuit court, Supreme Court. And of course, obviously, the Supreme Court, you take a great deal of time because you want to make sure you have someone who is going to interpret the Constitution, since there's virtually no review, right? From the district judges and circuit judges, there's a review. Supreme Court justice is there for life, and there's no review. So you better be right in who you appoint. And you've got to appoint someone, I think, who has a very, very strong dedication to being an interpreter rather than a creator. In our system of government, a judge interprets. And if you don't have a clear appreciation of that separation of powers, our whole democracy is thrown off. Because you can't really check the decision of a judge who's gone beyond, you know, what something really means. So I would be very careful to appoint strict constructionist judges. And, you know, the four that we just mentioned are great examples of judges who are strict constructionists.
This next one is also from the internet. Justin from New York, age 9. What are you going to do when you're president?
What am I going to do when I'm president?
Yep.
I'm going to work hard. And what I'm going to do as president is try to do the best that I can to make the 12 commitments that I've made to the American people a reality. I take that very, very seriously. Took it very seriously when I was mayor of New York City. And I will make certain we're on offense against Islamic terrorism. I'll do that by expanding the size of our military, expanding the size of our intelligence services, putting together a terrorstat program so that we make sure that we're exchanging information at all levels. You know, you had a very significant case here in New Jersey earlier this year when the U.S. attorney arrested Islamic terrorists who were going to attack Fort Dix and kill American soldiers at Fort Dix. It was right here in New Jersey. Islamic terrorists operating right here, 16 months investigation in which they had begun with other plots to kill American soldiers, including, I think at one point they had some kind of plan to attack the Army-Navy game. But their eventual plan was to go up to the sentry post at Fort Dix with machine guns and shoot the soldiers in the sentry booth. And that was interrupted because of an alert citizen who, in copying one of their DVDs at I don't remember if it was a Target or a store like that, a Walmart or a Target, but just a clerk who was copying it, burning it, he looked at it and he saw a very strange activity. He wasn't sure whether it was a joke or whether it was real Islamic terrorists planning to do something. And he was smart enough to call a Mount Laurel policeman. And the Mount Laurel policeman was smart enough to call the Joint Terrorism Task Force in Philadelphia. And the long and short of it is they began a 16-month investigation, and they arrested the people who did it and interrupted the plot. That's what we have going on in this country and around the world. And that's why I'm not exaggerating the Islamic threat. I wish I was exaggerating it. And that's why our number one commitment and the number one thing the next president has to do is to keep us safe. And the way to keep us safe is to keep us on offense.
Great. This next one comes from Sean in California. As a young person, I am concerned about the future of our country from an economic perspective. What will you do to help ensure a prosperous America for the next generation?
That's a very good question, and it's a perfectly appropriate question for a young person who's got a long future. And America being a prosperous country is enormously important to young people. A prosperous country means a country that continues to grow with a growth rate that's a robust, healthy growth rate. I believe there are four pillars of prosperity, four major things a president has to keep track of to make sure our country continues to be the dominant economic power in the world and one that continues to have tremendous social mobility and move people out of poverty. One is you have to control government spending, which we have not done a good job of. We've got to do everything we can to reduce the rate of growth of federal agencies. Because the more we can reduce it, the more efficient we can make them, the better we're going to be investing then ultimately in the area that creates prosperity, which is the private sector. So one of the things I would do is I wouldn't rehire half of the people who retire over the next 4 to 8 years, depending on how long I'm president. That would be about 42% of the workforce that's going to come up for retirement. I wouldn't rehire half of them. And we would save $22, $28 billion. That would create a lot of efficiency. What it would do, in addition to saving money, it would mean that all the agencies would have to do the work of 2 people with 1 person, or the work of 3 people with 1 person, which means they would move more toward technology, which businesses have done, the government has done. So that's the first pillar of prosperity. You've got to reduce government spending. All these earmarks have to go. We've got to reduce the size of agencies. Second thing we have to do is lower taxes, because we've got to put more money back into the private sector. Worst thing in the world would be to raise taxes. Best thing in the world would be to find ways to reduce taxes a little bit more, keep them low, like the Bush tax cuts have done, which I supported, but then try to lower it even more. Remember, you collect more money with lower taxes than you do with higher taxes. I reduced the income tax in New York by 24%, and I was collecting 40% more revenues from the lower tax than from the higher tax. So the second pillar of prosperity is a low, favorable tax rate. The third are sensible regulations. And unfortunately in America, some of our regulations aren't sensible. We regulate businesses out of America. We tax them out of America, and we regulate them out of America. We have the second highest corporate tax rate in the world. Number 2. We're losing business as a result of that. The president of France recognizes that the corporate tax rate in France is too high. He's going to lower it because they're losing business to Ireland and to Eastern Europe. France's corporate tax rate is lower than America's. We have too many regulations. Our taxes are too high. We've got to balance those things. The third pillar is we have got to introduce efficiencies into the way in which government operates, so that government doesn't act as too much of a burden, and make sure that the regulations are not overly restrictive. And finally, we have to have a sensible monetary policy. We have to have a monetary policy that is well adjusted by the Fed. We have to have an independent Fed and good people appointed. If you do those four things, if you reduce the size of government or reduce its growth, including dealing with all of these increased expenses, if you reduce taxes, if you balance regulation so they're not overly oppressive, and you have a sound monetary policy, our economy takes care of itself. Because it's a private economy. But you've got to recognize that it's a private economy. You cannot think that this is a government-planned, government-dominated economy. That's a socialist economy. The genius of our economy is that millions and millions of people make lots of different choices, and it creates a very efficient, very dynamic, terrific market. And if the government interferes with that too much, that's when we go into periods of decline.
This next one comes from Matt in Texas. How do you plan to actually stop illegal immigration?
I plan to stop illegal immigration by stopping illegal immigration. People used to ask me the same thing about crime in New York, which was the crime capital of America. They used to say, how are you going to stop crime in New York? How are you going to reduce crime in New York? I said, I'm going to do it by doing it. So how do you stop illegal immigration? It's real simple. You stop people from coming in illegally. You stop them at the border. You stop them before they get in. Once they get into the United States, we're in a deep problem. Because the numbers are so large. The numbers are so great, the numbers are so large that you can't deal with the volume. So you've got to stop them at the border. So you build a physical fence. You build a technological fence. You cover the border with both a physical fence and a technological fence. The technological fence warns you of people coming over. You deploy the Border Patrol every 25 or 50 miles. And the technological fence, which means photographic equipment, detects people coming to the border, and the Border Patrol goes there and stops them. Doesn't let them come in the first place. And then anybody that wants to come in has to have a tamper-proof ID card. Everybody that comes into this country has to be identified. We shouldn't allow people to come into this country unidentified. Most countries in this world don't allow it. America shouldn't allow it. We have the technology to stop it now, and we should. And that's the way to deal with it. If we try to deal with it just internally, the numbers are staggering. There are 12 million illegal immigrants. You can't possibly process 12 million illegal immigrants. We only have 2 million people in all the jails in the country. So how are you going to deal with 12 million illegal immigrants? So you have to stop it. And we can do it. And we've got to do it for a couple of reasons. First of all, to have an orderly, sensible country for our own sovereignty. And finally, in this era of terrorism, we just can't have people coming into this country unidentified. We can't just have people walking in and we don't know who they are. And finally, we've got to return Americanization to immigration. And there should be a requirement that if you become a citizen, you have to read English, write English, speak English, and understand the basics of the American civics, what American government's all about. Thank you.
I think this is going to be our last question for the evening, and it comes from Logan in California. Why did you choose to respond to MoveOn.org's ad in the New York Times attacking General Petraeus?
Because I was shocked by it. I read it on the evening of September 11, 2001. You might remember the ad was published on September 11, 2007, on the anniversary of September 11, 2001. I'm sorry. And I didn't read the papers that day in detail, and we didn't have the usual political day. So it was late at night, and I was going over all the newspapers, and I saw that, and I saw a transcript of Hillary Clinton's remarks, which followed up on MoveOn.org. MoveOn.org attacked General Petraeus and called him General Betray Us, accusing him of being a traitor and a liar. And Hillary Clinton, during his testimony in front of the Senate on September 11, 2007, went ahead and said that he is asking us to engage in a willful suspension of disbelief. Now, I spent a little time trying to interpret what willful suspension of disbelief means. I've come to the conclusion it's a Clintonianism. A Clintonianism is different than you and I who speak to each other directly, right? But then I figured out what it means if you speak to each other directly. It means that she's saying he isn't telling the truth. I think she has one heck of a nerve saying that an American general who's putting his life at risk for this country, protecting 160,000 American troops, doing the best he can to get success in a very difficult hand that he was dealt. I think she can disagree with his policies. I think she can disagree with his performance. I don't think she has the right to suggest or state that he's not telling the truth and attacking his character. I don't think MoveOn.org had a right to do that. So I decided to go on the offensive against them because I thought they had taken politics to a new low. You know, it's the Clintons who say, we don't want to engage in the politics of self-destruction. Well, what the heck is it to call a general betray us, and then to, in front of the United States Senate, to accuse him of not telling the truth? And that isn't the politics of personal destruction pointed at a politician. It's being pointed at a general who's commanding troops in a time of war. I think that's outrageous. I don't think we should stand for it. I think we should stand up to it. And I think, sometimes the Clintons go too darn far, and this is one time in which they went too darn far.
What a great evening this has been. We want to thank the Mankettes and the Schaumbachs for hosting this.
Steve?
Maybe even who knows, maybe even a historical evening. Just a really great night. And don't
Yogi?
And don't we all feel proud to be supporting such a great leader with such clear vision, knowing that he can take us where we need to go? The polls speak for themselves. He's the clear front runner and has been for a long time. All of our strategists and pollsters and campaign gurus tell us that they see a clear path to the nomination. It's incumbent upon us. It's almost like a NASCAR race. Down south we talk about NASCAR races, and really all over the country. If you're on the last lap of the Daytona 500 and you've got a 3-car lead, you just got to make sure you've got enough fuel in the engine to get to the finish line. We've got the leader, and we're going all the way to the nomination with your help. I want to ask you just to continue to help us. Tonight is a little housekeeping. We're our house party. I'd like to ask you to make sure that you bundle up your packets and overnight them tomorrow. We'd really appreciate that. And then I'd be shameless enough to just ask you to pass the hat one more time tonight. You can go online. You can click online. You could do that. Pass the hat one more time. Dig a little bit deeper tonight. And let's add to the kitty. We'd really appreciate it. Finally, this has been so much fun. I'd say there's a good opportunity that we'll do this again. And I'd like to encourage you as an attendee tonight to consider hosting an event the next time we do this. We'll be announcing it soon. We really appreciate your participation tonight. Everyone's been great. Mayor, thank you. Yogi, what a great thrill to be with you tonight.
Thank you. It's a
Thank
great
you.
idea.
Great.
We'll
Thank you
definitely
very
do it
much.
again. Thank you. Thank you.